have a sense of what a suburban upbringing, how that shaped your writing?
Yeah, I do. It absolutely made me want to escape it. So I became obsessed with any idea that took me out of that. And I think it actually shaped a lot of the narrative stuff I did early on. I mean, it certainly shaped my humour. My brother and I, my brother is hysterical. And I think it was totally in response to the tedium. I mean, we lived in a suburb where trees were man's natural enemy. There was great fear of the silver birch, that it would destroy the concrete driveway. I remember whole summers just sitting on a pavement in blazing heat because someone, my brother had told me there was an attractive girl had moved in down the end of the street. I never saw her, but I spent the whole summer there. That's what it was like. So when I started reading, which was pretty young, I just loved the fact that books took me to another land. I loved the fact that I could go anywhere. And I've got to say, when I moved out, that was it. I just went for it. I would go wherever I damn well felt like, and I still do, But in terms of writing, it was only years later that I actually came back to looking at my childhood and stopped denying my roots. I used to go to, I was at university, which is, I think, the greatest indictment of the tertiary education system I can think of, the fact that I got in there. But I went there and I tried to pretend I was working class, and I wasn't. And it was only years later that I just started thinking increasingly about what my childhood was and how it shaped me.
So when did you first know inside that you were a writer?
I don't know if you ever really do. I always feel like I'm a fraud. But don't tell the ABC. I think...
That's supposed to be a girl thing.
What?
The sense of fraudulence, about, I might get found out, but...
No, look, I started feeling good about writing when I was about 30. I started to think, yeah, I used to mumble it, but then I became more confident that I could actually do the job. But when I became thrilled with stories, I've got to say it was 3 or 4. I used to, 4 or 5, I would make up stories to my brother. Which he hated. One of the terrible things about me is I'm an insomniac. I sleep about 3 hours a night. And my poor brother, I just persecuted him.
How come you've made 1,000 hours of television?
Yeah. Well, I'm only 27 and it's really knocked me about. I remember telling him stories and starting them and not knowing where they went. And then in my head, as I told them, I would see where they would go. And I became terribly excited. I became quite addicted to a narrative and to plot. And
See, that's what I find... I'm sorry, I won't harp on any gender issues particularly, but that's what I find quite interesting, because when I was a little girl and I imagine that when you were a little boy and you were lying in bed, you were going, this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then pow... disaster and, that sort of stuff. That's what you were thinking about. But when I was a little girl, I was lying in bed thinking, like, when my father wants to put my mother down, he makes this move. I was thinking entirely about, not sequences or anything, but I was thinking only about relationships. So...
You're actually saying you're a deeper human being than me, aren't you?
No, I'm saying this is why I struggle with structure, which actually you are a master at. Do you think that plot versus character is gender-driven, or do you think that is a completely bullshit idea?
No, I don't, but I do think it's observational. And plot versus character is the great wrestle of writing. One without the other doesn't completely work. And I do think, I think largely because I want to escape my childhood, I would create great stories. And so I got an innate sense, I think I grew up with an innate sense of structure. I absolutely know how they'll play and where they're going and what they're doing.
So was that because you were a kid who just watched hours of telly?
No, we didn't get a telly till I was about 8. So,
And a fair bit of time after that.
Fair whack of time after that. A fair whack of time. Yeah.
Never moved away from it after 8.
But I grew a lot of. I really shouldn't have had that third glass of wine. I read a lot of books, and I planted them in the garden. And oh, look, there's Tolstoy. Pushkin just came up. Got a crop of Pushkin. No, I read a lot of books. I sort of, they just built and built in my head, so that I kind of had I guess it was a Campbell mythic structure implanted. But it was only years later. I think I gravitated to comedy because that made it easier to get away without doing character. It was sort of, a lot of it was situational, a lot of it was just joke. But in the end, as you mature, I mean, you obviously matured as a small child in bed watching your parents, but when I matured, which was about 40, I really became much more interested in character and nuance. And I mean, for those of that table over there that's doing writing, it's a really interesting exercise to take a scene from any great scene from a film that you've ever watched, get the dialogue, get the script, and then rewrite the scene, putting in someone you know intimately, and see what it does to that scene. That scene will not behave the way it does on the film, because once you start getting real people and real characters and real story, it dictates the story. It takes you in a direction, and you can't really stop it. So now for me, it's the most pretentious expression I'll use tonight, but I like to work out kind of what the philosophical underpinning of a script is. This is not very evident when you see what I've done, but I like to work out the terrain I'm going to do. Then I really like to work out what the characters are and who they are and how they might operate in that terrain. Because I think when you get the right density in a character, all of a sudden the plot just becomes a lot easier. People will only behave in a certain way.